It's Mark and Pete.
Welcome to the show again. More colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. This is the show that's dedicated to religion, politics and business. Each week we pick a key subject, and this one is at the forefront of many people's minds. Britain and the European Union. In or out? Well, the United Kingdom's relationship with the European Union, or EU as it's sometimes known, has long been one of the most divisive, emotive issues in British politics. So, as many people are debating, both in politics, business, and throughout the communities, should we actually be part of a European Union, or should, in fact, we actually withdraw? Well, David Cameron at this moment is actually trying to negotiate a new settlement between Britain and 27 other members of the European Union. And this is going to be a big challenge because essentially Britain is heading for a referendum. So by the end of 2017, the UK's continued participation in Europe is clearly under threat. Well, I thought I'd give my opinion on this topic. So we will give an opinion of a businessman, Mark, and we will also have the opinion of Pete, the clergyman. But let's start with opinions from Mark, the businessman. And I thought I'd this week raise the game, not just with a poem, but a little ditty. And this ditty is called Do the UK Okie Dokie. Europe put your left party in, Europe put your right party out. In, out, you shake your policies about. You do the UK okie dokie, and you do a U-turn around. That's what it's all about. All do the jiggery pokey, all do the jokey pokey. Oh, it won't be low-key. Knees bend, let's pray. Ta-ra, ta-ra, ta-ra. So are we in or out, Clergyman Pete?
Well, I think that the thing about the European Union is, first of all, it's not Europe. It's not about Europe. Europe, a collection of countries, should get on together. They should trade with each other. They should seek to be peaceable. They should have arrangement and organisations where they can respond to things like terrorist threats and to organised crime together and organised trade agreements. But they should not be, I believe, a European Union. I believe that's a mistake. A European Union isn't even a federation of separate states. It's a dismissal of the state. It's a refutation of the importance of the state. It's in the European Union, if you listen to the rhetoric of the debates at the centre of Europe in the European Parliament, you hear the idea of statehood and pride in your nation state as being somehow populist, pronounced with a spit. It's something that is populist, something that shouldn't be done, that in being proud of your nation, you are somehow being aggressive and bigoted and unpleasant. And I think that this idea of ironing out the difference between the nations, whilst it seems like it's aimed at peace, is actually a power grab.
Yeah.
And I believe it should be resisted with every fibre of our being.
Well, I mean, one of my points is we're clearly not singing from the same song sheet. And as I highlighted earlier in and that too. But the point here is that there is clearly a massive difference of opinion, not just, of course, in Europe. In Britain, we seem to be very, very divided. There are a lot of people who certainly feel that it is important to be part of the European Union for a number of reasons. Certainly, they believe that, and I think this is a short-term view, but it would actually affect businesses, that businesses would feel under threat, that they would lose their influence over some of the contracts and some of the relationships that they've got. Or others actually feel, well, wait a minute, it's actually the European Union that's stifling Britain over either legislation and many other factors. But let's set a bit of scene here, because actually, where did this all start? Why are we in this situation today? Well, I think it's important to highlight that the formation of the European Union really stems from just after the Second World War in 1945. Now, the concept behind this was this principle of putting together, if you like, a European nation. This is a collection of countries that would work together and would never again wreak such damage on one another as we saw in the Second World War and, of course, obviously the First World War too. At the time, Winston Churchill fully supported this idea, and he actually sort of proposed a Europe, and as he says here, as I quote, a structure under which it can dwell in peace, in safety and in freedom, a kind of United States of Europe. Now, that was the original concept. So what do you think has really sort of happened as that we look at the European relationship today? What's your view on that journey that we're going through?
Well, I think that what we've seen is a taking of that concept and a twisting of it. And it's a twisting of it that I don't believe is done with any great overarching Machiavellian intent to take over. When I talked about a power grab before, I believe it is a power grab, but it's a power grab, an attempt to control that comes from just an assumed method of operating. So it has changed because the way that Europe works and the way that Britain works is very different. There's a misunderstanding. When Churchill talked about a kind of United States of Europe, he was thinking, quite obviously, of trying to prevent the sort of conflict that we now call the Second World War that had come from European countries not working together. He was trying to counter that by getting the countries to work together. But he would not. I mean, there couldn't have been any part of his thinking the sort of monster that the EU has become today. The EU, the European Union, is now closer to what the Soviet Union was like than it is to the United States of America.
Yes.
It's the way, to give one example, and perhaps the best example, really, because it gets to the heart of the difference in thinking. And this is my main point of how things went so awry, why we've got to where we are. And that is the way of thinking generally across European countries outside of Britain is of setting directives and rules and laws by a central committee of people appointed who are experts. In Britain, the way that you would run in a similar thing would be to have people with conflicting views arguing it out and then have a democratic vote. It's a different way of operating. The British way is messier and things don't always get done in a timely fashion. The difference is that in the British way, the view of the people gets represented, whereas in the European way, it's the view of a few cognoscenti, people who are part of those who are seen as the elite or experts. Their views are the ones that hold sway. Now, there are arguments either way about which way is better, because, if you have experts, maybe they do know better. If you have what I'm referring to as the British way, you have the actual view of the people represented who could be wrong, but at least I would argue it's what the people actually want. And when you're talking about the countries and when you're talking about a collection of countries, you're actually talking about people. And however, that's the reason I think things have gone so wrong. There's a difference in culture, and the culture is as shown through the way that the bureaucracy and the legislature and the politicians in different countries operate are so different between Britain and the rest of Europe that Britain would be better off becoming a vassal state of the United States than being part of Britain. The thinking is so different. Yeah. And for that reason, what I've seen is the growth of a new Soviet Union with the death of the other one, called the European Union, but it might as well be the EU-SSSR. for the difference it has.
Well, I mean, that paints a very bleak picture, but I'd like to sort of paint a slightly more rosier picture, because I think that if you look at the relationship that Britain has had with a number of key countries, and I'll just cite a few. Clearly, we've had turbulent relationships with Germany, but economically, they are a great ally. They're a partner, Germany being a great manufacturing nation, and similarly again with Britain's history, that we trade well with Germany, and similarly again with France and one or two of the other key countries there. However, the bit that I want to get to is that we're going to be facing a referendum in 2017, basically. And that is a milestone, because to me, I have a worry on this. We're already going to go that way now, because the recent 2015 election has determined that Conservatives are in power, and they have already committed to this. It's my opinion, actually, that there is the danger that I think that some people feel that it opens up the opportunity for people to say, we are going to withdraw, and yet those who say we're going to stay in, I feel that it's too soon. We have an economy in the UK which is clearly fragile. We have a massive debt. We have also many, many issues that we have to face internally, let alone working out our relationship with Europe. And I think that what should have happened is that the referendum should have been on the agenda, but not for this current term of government between 2015 and 2020. However, we've got it now. So the danger for me is that what can happen is that Cameron is going to be negotiating with other EU members. I don't think there's enough time to get it right. So I believe that the concept and framework, that's the original framework, of having an agreement, if you like, if you're thinking it from a business point of view, that you work on standard terms, but you still have the flexibility to determine your own destiny. Because that's, as you say, that's something that we don't have. So I agree with the original concept of Europe, and I think that that's something worth fighting for. Now, some people may say it's too late. It's not worth it anymore. It's become, as you say, too bureaucratic. There is no way that we can possibly influence so many other members who are so opposed to what we think today. But I still think it is worth going for, because if we don't, and we pull out of the European Union, we effectively sever our ties as we know it today, there is the danger that we could become isolated. And bearing in mind where we are, and it's not purely economical, there are many other things that it would affect, whether it's about migration, whether it's about the influx of talent and skilled labor that we bring in, and many, many other things in terms of trade that it would affect. I think that we should be still part of Europe because of where Britain is today. That's my view.
Well, I just want to take you up on a few points, because I think that it's interesting. There were different views, and two main views on the EU. Obviously, it's in or out, which it has sort of divided the main political parties, and also divides Mark and Pete, that great institution. And I want to take you up on a few issues. I want to take you up on a few issues there. One is you mentioned earlier about trading relations, particularly with Germany. You know, the powerhouse in terms of industry of Europe. Yes, great trading relationship between Britain and Germany, and there's no way that's going to stop if we leave the European Union. I mean, that just the economic pressure from, for example, the great car manufacturing companies who sell so many of their cars in Britain, that's not going to stop. There's going to be trading relationships. There can be trading relationships. There will be trading relationships out of the European Union. Britain can trade with Europe and vice versa. But the difference is, if you're a member of the European Union, all the regulations that apply when you're trading within the European Union apply to all of your manufacturing. Whereas you may not have chosen as a company to trade with Europe at all. A particular company may only trade, for example, with China, because all they make is something that's only sold in China. You know, it could be something specific. They don't want to trade with the European Union, and yet they have to manufacture their jiaozi, Chinese dumplings, to the specifications of the European Union. Now, that's just ridiculous. And, I gave a silly example of Johnson, but it could be any, because they say so, but it could be any different manufacturing company. They have to take on all of the regulations. So they'd be freed from that. Of course, if they wanted to trade with Europe, they'd have to have those regulations, but not for everything. That would free up such an amount of small businesses to be able to trade with different countries in the world. And the thing about companies is a great example of how this has become a question of power. Big companies, yes, are in favour of the European Union, but so many small companies, the medium-sized countries, the agents of growth within our country, are very much against it. If you ask the big companies, of course they are in favour of having a larger workforce, but they are blind to the social problems that causes, whereas a small company would not be. Okay, influx of talent you talked about. If we leave the European Union, we have a problem with the influx of talent. The problem we have is with an influx of the talentless. We have people coming in, whatever their talents. If we left the European Union, we would gain control of our own borders, regain control, such that we decide as a country who comes in. And we could say, well, we only want talented people, thank you. So therefore, you would get the talented people coming in and not those who were not going to contribute to society. It's a question of gaining control, not just of your borders, but control of, thereby, of your industry, of being able to promote small businesses who are then going to grow, and to promote entrepreneurs. And, localism is so important. Just bring up a buzzword of Mark and Pete. We need to focus on those small to medium-sized businesses and create an environment in which they can grow. And that's better within a Britain that has good relationship with Europe and with the rest of the world, and isn't just tied into Europe. Yeah. And just talking about figures, I mean, if you talk about figures in terms of economy, Europe, in terms of its economy, Europe as a whole, is the only shrinking economy of a group of countries in the world. You've got Asia, you've got America, you've got Australasia. These countries, even America, are experiencing some growth in their trade, but you're not finding it in Europe. Why? Because they are over-regulated. They're controlled by a central elite. They're just not part of the modern world. It's backward-looking. Let's get out, and as soon as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's all very well, because you've sort of fallen into what I believe would actually be what I would describe as the short-termism. And I agree with a lot of the points that you've made. However, what will happen is the following. So I'm taking a more longer-term view. If Britain were to come out of the European Union, as it stands today, yes, we would be able to address some of those short-term issues, like the issues of migration and so on. And we could actually control things better. But I'm thinking it from a commercial point of view. In business, what often happens when you suddenly determine to ring fence your closer partners, and I'm going to say, rightly or wrongly, whether they do it or not, but what would happen is I could imagine that the likes of Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and many others that are in the EU currently would actually essentially start to build legislation to ring fence and prioritize against the people within those communities. That, in turn, would kill and stifle prosperity for small to medium-sized businesses. I'll give you an example. Chemical companies. We, as a country, United Kingdom, rely on the chemical industry. It's not our only manufacturing base. There are many others. But typically there are things like feedstock. There are standards that you have to meet, even through to things like pharmaceuticals, which continue the journey of the chemical industry. So you have a number of stratas or specialisms that occur throughout the chemical, petrochemical and specialist chemical companies. I could see that what would happen is that the methods of standards would change over time, which Britain would have to comply and would become very expensive to actually meet those standards. And I think that what would happen is we would eventually get isolated. Yes, you're right. In the short term, it probably seems implausible that that could happen. But ironically, we could find ourselves in a position over a longer period of time of being too isolated. And that's why I come back, and this is why I come back to my original point, which is about timing. This is going to happen over the next few years, and as in the actual referendum is on 2017, and it may vary, but it's going to be within this current government's term. If we decide to pull out, to me, we're at a delicate point where we still, no matter what we do, no matter how brilliant this government actually turns their attention to the economy, getting rid of debt, etc., going into the 2020-2025 term, we're still going to be in a fragile situation. And that means that any relationship that we have, yes, has to be addressed. And I do agree, actually, ironically, although I'm not a political advocate of David Cameron, I do agree that his efforts to try and reform a lot of the terms in which we have with Britain's relationship with the EU should be addressed. So I favour that. But I don't think he's got enough time to address all the things that you have said in the short term, because the danger is, in the long term, we could lose out.
Well, to address your last point first, there's no way he can address them because of the way the European Union is run. But I'll come back to that just in a moment. I think you're wrong on the long-term implications of leaving the European Union. You see, the problem with part of the European Union is it stifles us having trade agreements with the growing economies around the world. Long term, we're going to shrink with the European Union, shrink with the economies that are linked together in the European Union, just as the euro is failing, the European Union project is failing. Long term, we're looking at shrinking, becoming an irrelevance in global terms. If we leave the European Union, Britain has a chance to grow. The European Union, sadly, I believe, is going to continue to shrink. We're better off out of it. We have just excellent relationships. Just to give an example, there was an interesting discussion programme on the BBC, which, as you know, gets quite a lot of funding from the European Union, so has no axe to grind about leaving at all, if anything, the opposite. And the BBC had this discussion program, had on the head of one of the major car manufacturers in China, asked a leading question: what do you think? People were sat on opposite sides of the studio, and he was on the side of people, all the other people, who wanted to leave the European Union. When asked the question, he said he just wanted to trade with Britain. He didn't want to trade with the European Union. We have such great relationships because of our history with other people. Even if they don't speak English, and with other English-speaking nations, we have that cultural similarity which enables us to relate better to them. Britain's long-term future is better off outside the European Union. I fear that it's not going to happen, that we're going to stay within the European Union. But can I just address
there's one thing I'd just like to mention on that, and that is I do understand that particular point. I think it's also crucial to mention that you're right. As we look at it today, the project has failed. Well, it hasn't completely failed, but it is failing, and it's definitely going that way. But having said that, there are a few milestones which could actually change things. Obviously, Greece's relationship with the EU is one thing. I still think that even if Greece were not to be in it, the project would still continue, or at least I know that certainly France, Germany, would certainly try to continue. But the Britain's relationship with other regions, whether that's what we would see globally as being the emerging nations, whether that's China, Brazil, and so on, let's not look at that in two rose-tinted glasses. Although clearly there have been opportunities, and we're not saying we should not have relationships with those nations at all. We do, and we can, whichever the option, in Europe or out of Europe. However, the fact is that there are major problems there as well. It's not something where we should suddenly think, hold on, that is actually a better option for us. And that's why that I think that, with the significant amount of business that we gain from Europe, mainland Europe in particular, that anything that potentially would jeopardize that, which I think it would do in the long term if we were to completely pull out, and I think that that's something that would be mapped as part of the project. And I think that's the key. We've got to be careful that we suddenly think that actually the solution lies elsewhere, because those other solutions are equally fraught with issues.
Well, they're fraught with issues, but the problem is that you're assuming there that we would stop trading with Europe, or you're speculating about what the response would be. It's a speculation. The economic reality means that Europe will continue to trade with Britain.
I think we'd be constrained. I don't think
there's no evidence for that at all. There's no evidence for that at all. That's purely speculation based, putting thoughts into their heads. I mean, I can't see that, say, major manufacturing companies in any country in Europe is going to stop trading with Britain because of the political differences. The economics of the situation will overrule any sentimental feelings of or any poor sentiment towards Britain leaving. And as time goes on, that poor sentiment will have faded into history anyway. So I think the long-term future outside of the European Union, not outside of European trade, remember, we're talking about having good relationships. And I believe that from what we've seen so far within the European Union, that the relationship of Britain with the European Union will be better being good neighbours outside. Now, you see...
that's the irony, because our manufacturing base is weak in comparison to many other manufacturers, like the...
It is now. After so many years within Europe.
It is now.
If we were outside the European Union, we would have
different standards. If you had different standards, what will happen is, potentially, it could, as this European project moves forward, if we weren't part of scripting the legislation going forward on manufacturing standards, it could even be difficult for some foreign manufacturers, i.e. non-UK manufacturers, actually investing in the UK. So we have to think of it from that point of view. And it could be more motivational to manufacture more in mainland Europe. Now, we're already seeing that anyway. Many manufacturers have pulled out. Car manufacturers have pulled out. Look at Southampton. Look at other places around the country. They've lost manufacturing bases and shifted them to other parts of Europe because it's cheaper. And
Can I just I mean, they've done that while we're part of the European Union. That's happened while we're not trading so effectively with other parts of the world. That is evidence for the opposite point of view. We need to leave in order to have greater control over what regulations we put on. But I just wanted to come back to another point. I'll give you a chance to come back on that, Mr. Paxman. But I just want to make another point that that's been missed out. That the decision-making process within the European Union is such that you're talking about changes happening as though there was a political process to go through. But it's not as though there were all these countries coming together and making decisions. There is an unelected body called the Commission who make all the decisions.
Yes.
If that were replaced with an elected body, if that replaced, for example, with the leaders of the different countries or their appointees, maybe the finance ministers of the different countries meeting together, I and pretty much all the Eurosceptics would be in favour of it.
Yes.
That's a good thing. It's the current political union that's the problem, not having some sort of trading body.
And I agree with that, yes. I do agree.
I mean, I think both of us, though, would agree with... I mean, I just want to bring in something that the Bible says on how disagreements festering can be a problem. Right at the near the start of the Bible, you have a well-known story in the Bible about the Tower of Babel, in which God, concerned about the arrogance of humans building this huge tower to show themselves, we would say, this is putting something onward to what the Bible says, but it looks like they're trying to make themselves equal with God. He scatters them as a curse, and the curse on them is that they will all speak different languages and not get on together. And then when the current church starts, the day of Pentecost, in the book of Acts, chapter 2, we see a reversal of that. They're given one prayer language, and they have the ability, at least for that moment, for everyone from all over the world to understand each other. So this act of God, the main story in the Bible about God reversing the curse of Babel, is something we should strive towards in Europe and in all countries in the world. So I just wanted to bring that in just to make sure that the key is, and I think we must be totally agreeing with this. I'm sure you will be. They're saying that, look, we want to be able to work together. All the countries in Europe, we want them to be able to live at peace and to be able to trade, to help each other into prosperity. But the way of doing it, that's what we're disagreeing on.
Correct. And with that, one last question, which is, are we UK okie dokie or UK no way Jose?
Well, I think we're no way Jose.
Oh, dear. Well, there you go. Well, look, listeners, we definitely want your opinion on this matter. It is an important debate. It will rage on for a couple more years. So drop us a line on markandpete.com. Go onto the website and fill out the contact form. Join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.